I believe our next two speakers are here somewhere. So the next two speakers are Ivan Bolzen and Sylvain Melchior. They will be giving a talk on how to build a medical data platform, machine learning for surgical laser robots. Ivan Bolzen is a data engineer by profession. He joined Zuelike Engineering in September 2019. Since his BSc in computer science, his focus has been on development of data platforms in Python and operationalization of machine learning models, first in academia, and now with a focus on healthcare and pharmaceutical industry. Sylvain Melchior is a full-stack data scientist at Zuelike. His expertise range from setting up cloud data pipelines to machine learning processing pipelines to front-end web development and data display. Advanced Autonomy Tools has identified huge potential for machine learning applications within the surgical field. Unlike most other applications of machine learning, mistakes made by such systems in the medical field can directly harm people. In a collaboration with Zuelike, Advanced Autonomy Tools set up a machine learning process, empowering them to leverage the power of such systems in their products. In this talk, the understanding on how to tackle medical machine learning projects and how to establish best practices in such processes will be presented. Please come on stage. Get the button there.
Yes.
Back and forth. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So, hello everyone, and thank you for joining our presentation about how to build a medical data platform for then training machine learning models, which are then used in a surgical robot. We are Ivan and Sylvain from the Zuelike Data Science team. And in the first part of the presentation, we are now going to show you the needs for such a platform. And then in the second part of the presentation, we will show you how we implement exactly one such platform. So, as already mentioned, Sylvain and I are from Zuelike. We are a data science team of around 15 people located in Zurich. And one of our recent engagements was together with a company, with a medium-sized company based in Basel called AOT. AOT's mission is to build a surgical robot for cutting bones and hard tissue with cold laser ablation technology. Well, the big benefit of using a system such as Carlo is that he can cut complex shapes without heating the bone. This, in the end, facilitates bone healing and lowers the overall procedural cost. You may see that a robot has huge potential for machine learning, and AOT is therefore focusing on two main areas: computer vision and motion planning. I will give you now an example of a computer vision use case. One example use case is measuring the depth of a cut. So by applying computer vision to medical images, it is determined how far Carlo has already cut through the bone or through the hard tissue. I will now hand over to Sylvain, and he is giving you a more insight in what it means to develop such a medical system.
Yes, thank you very much. As we all know here, machine learning has great potential in a medical environment. It can really truly benefit the patient's life, which is great. But of course, if such a model does a mistake, as we also all know, this can really harm people, and we want to prevent this at all costs. Of course, this is not only true for the model. Actually, it is true for the whole data science pipeline. I mean, we acquire some images, we store them somewhere, do some experiments, run simulation, train some models, deploy them on the robot, and then the patient is happy, hopefully. But for example, let's say we have used the wrong metric for the evaluation. Let's say we have used a mean absolute error instead of a maximum absolute error, and our model looks great, does really good performance, but in some rare cases, it just cuts way too deep and the patient dies. We don't want this. The same also for data storage. Let's say we mix up our metadata. We think our model works great on the intended use, except for children, but actually it's vice versa. We just mix the data up. We also want to prevent this. And the same also from the very beginning. Let's say we have acquired some images, have trained some models, but then in the real use case, this data source drifts over time, maybe some physical properties change, and then the same thing. Our model does not necessarily handle this data anymore, and we do misclassifications and predictions. So I hope this shows the need for a regulated process. This is not only a need by these examples, it's also a legal need. It's a legal requirement that we have a process. And Zühlke has the medical machine learning process. We have presented this at last year's SDS, so we won't go into details here. We just give a quick summary because the platform is based on this process, and so it's important to know the details. Not the details, but like the overall structure. Actually, it's very simple. We have some data management where we got some data. We split this data into a development and a holdout set. We then do some research on this development set, then have some model weights. We'll evaluate this model on the holdout set, and then have a fixed data set. This is now new. This is especially in case compared to a classical machine learning process. We have some fixed data set where we get here, and then can use this fixed data set together with the model weights to do an inference unit development with a regression test. This was super fast. We have it on our website. It's not very different from a standard machine learning process. We just highlight some key components which are special in a medical environment. These are, for example, that we need to have a lot of control about our data. We cannot just use some network share and just throw in the data there. We need to control the data source. We need to control data access. We need to be sure that the data cannot flip, that the random bit flip, which could happen, does not influence our problem. We need to make sure that no one can enter wrong data, that no one can access data which he shouldn't, that no one can label data which is not qualified for this. So there are a lot of requirements coming out of risk management which pose constraints on this data management. Then we have this trio here in the middle, which is the research phase. This is also a bit a special construct. So we want to do research there. And in research, we want to be very flexible. We want to try out a lot of models. We want to compare a lot of stuff. And this is hard if you have these medical requirements, if you have high recurrence on code quality, if you need to do reviews all the time. This slows you down, and you don't want this. So that's why we have this very free research phase, which is embraced by a highly controlled data split before and a highly controlled model evaluation afterwards. So the data split, you split the data and make sure that the researcher is physically not able to access the holdout set, whatever he does, and we will show later how we do this. Then afterwards, whatever happens in this model, in this research phase, whatever the researcher could have done wrong, we need to make sure that we will detect this afterwards. In the model evaluation phase, we need to make sure that even though we were not as compliant in this research phase, that afterwards we will detect this, and it's not a problem. And then in the end, the inference unit development, the code we have created in this research phase will not end up in the robot. I mean, I wouldn't want to lie under a robot which was fed with such code. So we'll re-implement this model, but only the model and not the training, because this is a bit the trade-off now for this research. We need to re-implement the model, but we have a regression test. So we make sure that this re-implementation actually behaves exactly the same way as the evaluated model. And so our chain of argument is complete, and we are sure that the final model is the right one. And the good thing is this re-implementation and these regression tests can then also be used for a startup test. So we would need to do this anyways. So the first, this looks really unidirectional, but actually we can, of course, go backwards, especially in the first 3 steps. But as soon as we go to model evaluation, it's really hard to go back, because once here in model evaluation, we touched our holdout set, and now it's really hard to maintain data integrity on this holdout set. So it's really hard to justify once you reached model evaluation and you see that there was a mistake to go back without acquiring new data. So it's always important to keep in mind. The first 4 of these steps are under computer system validation, so we do not need to have a lot of requirements on the code, but on all our tools. Like we need to validate Python, we need to validate PyTorch, you need to validate Docker, SageMaker, whatever you use, you need to validate it. And then in the last part, this is now really code which ends up in the robot. It's a medical device, software as a medical device, and needs to be developed accordingly with the certain standards like IEC 62304. Yes, as I said, this is also on our website.
So thank you very much. So we now know what it needs to develop such a machine learning model which is ending up in a robot. Now the question is, how can we build a system that supports exactly this process, but also fulfills all the regulatory requirements? So for AOT, the whole platform was built on AWS, so on Amazon Web Services. What you can see here is a super simplified version of the system architecture. And it is not meant to explain everything in detail, but it should give you an overview about the data flow and which technologies we have used in which steps. So I'm starting on the left. There we receive the data, so the medical images. They are uploaded into a central data repository via a custom-made data management application. Once the data is in the central data repository, it is taken via a Jupyter Notebook, just a template connected to the central data repository, and split into the different data sets. Once we have these data sets, we rely on the AWS capabilities for machine learning, so namely SageMaker, and place on top MLflow for proper experiment tracking. Once we have developed a suitable model, this model goes into the model evaluation phase and is again taken from a Jupyter Notebook, which is connected to the central data repository, and evaluated. If the model is fine and good to go for placing on the robot, it is promoted to the normal software development life cycle of AOT, which then is not part of the platform anymore. So we will now go into detail about each of the components, and we will first stop at our storage layer. So our storage layer consists of an S3 object storage and of a document DB, Amazon Document DB. And to give you an example how it works, when we receive the medical images, the images itself will be placed on the object storage because they are massive volume data. But together with the images, we also gather lots of metadata, like where was the surgery happen, who was the surgeon, when was it conducted, and so on and so forth. And all this data go into the document DB, which then is queryable. And we can then query for certain data entries and download or access the data asset from the S3 storage. When designing this storage layer, we had to draw high attention on traceability. But why? We always need to be able to answer the question, which data was present when we trained model XY? And you can imagine model XY could be trained 5 years ago. And if we compare it to, let's say, non-medical machine learning processes, answering this question is not a nice-to-have feature. It's like a legally enforced requirement. So how did we achieve that for this platform? We simply introduced a warm model on S3, so write once, read many, never delete, and applied bitemporal modeling, so document versioning on the document database. You may wonder what this certificate on the upper left means. So this certificate means everything which is indicated by it had to undergo the computer system validation process, which is this medical validation process for tools. So having a storage layer by its own is somehow useless. We need to have a way for data scientists and developers for easily accessing those data. And therefore, we provided a platform SDK. It is handling authentication, authorization, and it is also serving as an abstraction for S3 and Document DB so that the data scientists in the end can work with business objects and don't have to deal with the underlying storage technologies. I will give you an example how this works in general. So imagine you're a data scientist on the left and you want to access the data on the right. So you're probably using just a Jupyter Notebook, then you're just simply providing your credentials to the platform SDK, and then the platform SDK hides all the complexity for you. So it negotiates credentials, then it assumes the right credential, assumes the right role, and then in the end access the underlying storage layer. So you have to write one line of code. In the end, it is translated to a complex process. So once we have the storage layer and the layer in between, we need to get data into our storage. Therefore, as I already mentioned, we have a custom-built application, which is called Data Management Application. It is used for downloading the data from the robot to an offline transfer device. Then this transfer device is placed into a terminal. On this terminal, this data management application is running, and the data is uploaded into the repository. But this application is also used for placing the gold standards, so for placing the labels on the images. This means it is taken by medical experts for labeling our data. And after that, the data should be ready for like the real machine learning, which is now highlighted by Silvan.
Thanks. So now we go through these 3 steps we have highlighted before in the process. The first is the splitting, which is again a validated process, as we see with this certificate in the title. So what's special here is, I mean, we use now this platform SDK, we access the data, we do some important calculations, like we calculate correlations, confounders, group, intended use, as was highlighted in the last presentation, bias, and so on. So a lot of important biostatistics. And then we store this data set into the database. And then, this is a special part now, we actually create a new role. We create a role researcher for this use case. And all the research now in the next phase is done through this role. And this now makes sure that whatever the researcher does, whatever code he wants to write, he will not be able to access data he shouldn't. So we will not lose the integrity on our holdout set. And this is done through this platform SDK, which creates this role. In the research itself, we have this nice pipeline, which looks more complicated than it is. It's actually quite simple. You're a data scientist. You work with some code, which is on some repository. You code some model, which you find is good, some, for example, UNet or whatever. And then you submit a training job to SageMaker. This is the cloud platform of AWS to run models. There you can train your models. You can run hyperoptimization jobs. You can compare hundreds of models against each other within a short time. And then you track all this stuff into MLflow. MLflow is an experiment tracking service, and it enables us in the afterwards to see for each of experiment, like what was the code that you used, what was the data we used, what parameters did we use, what were the matrices, what are the results, what are our artifacts, what are the models itself. So we have tracked everything there, and then can, through a nice web interface, go through it and do nice interpretations and iterate and start with our experiments again. And this then fulfills this traceability requirement, which is really important because you can then justify each decision you made through the process. Afterwards, we're in the evaluation phase. This is now again highly controlled because now we need to really make sure that whatever happened before, we will detect it. Here it's also rather simple. We download the model from MLflow, we evaluate it through the platform SDK, and then store these reference predictions. And now, in the last step, this model has now survived our process. It went through the whole platform, and we are now very confident that the model we have is now good. It is good for the intended use, and we use it and go through the regular software development process where it actually leaves the platform.
So the current state of the project is that we have implemented the platform. The platform is validated, so it undergoes the computer system validation process, and we are now at the end of the first use case. So first use case is implemented, it is integrated into the robot, into Carlo, and it is now waiting for approval by the authorities. So here I would like also to thank AOT. I mean, without AOT, we couldn't show you all these super details. And we would not be Zühlke if we would not learn from our projects and from our processes. And here are like 3 key learnings we got throughout the project. So using AWS services definitely accelerates the development. But when you're using AWS services, you really need to draw attention on their limitations and really draw attention on the details of the limitations, because we many times faced the situation where we met such a limitation without having expected it before. Then, second point is, and we can say that because we're now at the end of the first use case, the initial investment into the platform has already nearly paid off. And this is mainly because AOT could then solely focusing on doing machine learning research. They did not have to deal with any data management, they did not have to deal with any infrastructure, and they did not have to deal with any machine learning tracking or so on and so forth. So solely data science and no data engineering anymore. And what we highlighted it not that much in this presentation, but we tried to always apply software engineering best practices throughout the whole project. And it is not paying off initially, but believe me, when it gets hectical, towards the end of the project, you're super happy if you have an automated CI/CD pipeline or you have automated infrastructure as code. And also, like, having agile delivery methods always pays off. So thank you very much for listening, and we are now super happy to answering all your questions or discussions.
I'm sure all the data scientists in the audience are very happy because they do not like all this work you're talking about, you know. Thank you very much for helping them out. Do we have any questions from the audience? Or from the virtual audience?
There.
Yeah, well, you can come to the mic.
Very much for the very exciting and interesting talk. I would like to ask two questions regarding validation of the environment as well as method. The first question is that what is your gold benchmark to really explore and exploit all the possibilities of your environment, including Docker, Python, PyTorch, and check the version compatibilities? And the second one is regarding the model validation, which is about the train validation and test split. What are the statistical models that you use in a way that the test set is sufficiently independent, but also not completely independent of the training set, that the model will generalize well in the real-world applications, but it also can generalize to the test set, and you can have a valid validation of the model. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Shall I take the first one and you will take the second one? Okay. Regarding the tools we have used and the compatibilities between. So, I mean, one goal is always to minimize the set of tools you're using, because in the end, you always need to do a risk analysis for each of the tool and also go through like a known bug list and so on and so forth. So try to minimize the used tools. And then the compatibilities itself, I mean, you discover them while using it. So, I mean, when you cannot deploy, for example, a training to AWS without having a compatible Docker image. So, I mean, if this is the question, or probably I misunderstood it.
Yes, and then to the second question, I mean, first, as a data scientist, you probably won't be able to like justify this. You really need people with domain knowledge, like you need to talk with the respective experts in the medical field. And it's not just like independence. I mean, in the end, they're medical image, they are dependent. So in some way, they're always dependent. It's more about like relations. Is the relationship between the training and the test set the same as then to the intended use? Because if you know that it generalizes through this relationship, then you're confident that it also generalizes to the intended use. But these are questions, as a data scientist, I myself cannot answer. I need some domain expert from this field, and I need to know the intended use. I need to know the intended population, like what people will lie underneath this robot, and you need clinical trials, and this is a really complex stuff, yes.
Okay, so follow up on the first question, I would like to point at the point that like sometimes everything works together, but the performance is not as expected. So you might have a little bit of a drop. Do you have like benchmark tests to really like evaluate the performance, or in measures designed to evaluate these performances?
So yes, I mean our final quality gate, or really the quality gate which matters, is the model evaluation phase. If it passes this model evaluation phase, and then we are getting this fixed data set, which are like, we now know the model has achieved a certain performance, which is fulfilling our requirement. Then we are generating reference prediction, which are called fixed predictions. And we are promoting the model together with this fixed prediction into the software development lifecycle. And in the end of the software development lifecycle, they are again taking the fixed predictions, giving them into the model and check if they receive the same result. So And if they receive the same result, we can be sure that nothing has happened in between in the re-implementation. And we can also be sure that because these fixed predictions were produced with the model and this model has passed the evaluation, it's fine for us. So this is how our argument chain, how we satisfy the quality of the model.
Thank you very much. And follow up on the second.
Perhaps you can take that during the break.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much for the questions. Thank you very much for the nice presentation as well. I'm sure Zürich is very proud of your work that you have done and making the life of data scientists easier there. We have something for you. Thank you very much for coming here. And all the very best with your future work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.